And thank you all again for coming. My name is Bonnie Fernandez-Wozliak, and I am the Director of Inclusive Excellence and an Associate Professor here at Penn State Abington. And this panel is specifically focused around international perspectives. As some of you might be aware, my office has essentially had themed sessions for the last couple of years. The first one thinking about questions of disabilities, the last year focusing on anti-racist practices and policies. And this year, we are specifically as a campus thinking about international perspectives and what it means to honor our international students, our colleagues, and broader community members. What can we do as faculty, staff, students, etc., to make not just Penn State Abington, but any space more welcoming and more inclusive for anyone who's coming in with questions of international perspectives. So I have asked our final panelists today to think with us. I'm going to take a moment to read their bios before I let them take the mic and I step back. So first on the docket today, speaking first anyway, will be Dr. Ming Fang He, who is a professor of curriculum studies at Georgia Southern University. She's been teaching in the graduate and pre-service and in-service levels in the United States, Canada, Hong Kong, and China. She explores education, curriculum, and life in between and Eastern and Western philosophy, and with a focus on Confucius, John Dewey, Ikeda, Wilmington Martha Nussbaum, and Edward Said. She has written about cross-cultural narrative inquiry of language, culture, and identity in multicultural contexts, cross-cultural teacher education, and curriculum studies, activist practitioner inquiry, social justice research, exile curriculum, diaspora curriculum, narrative of curriculum in the US South and Asia diaspora studies. Her current research is expanded to the education of ethnic minorities and disenfranchised individuals, groups, tribes, and societies, particularly Asian diasporas in the United States, Canada, Hong Kong, mainland China, and other international contexts. Next, we have Dr. Shawn Savage, who is an assistant professor and area lead for curriculum and instruction doctoral concentration in the Department of Education and Leadership within Watson College of Education at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. With over 10 years experience in K-12 higher education as an academic and a student affairs professional, Dr. Savage investigates across access, equity, and justice issues in K-12 teacher education and higher education. He primarily studies the experiences of Black males using justice-centered qualitative research approaches, including with athletics and the arts, within athletics and the arts. Notably, his Jamaican background, African-informed inquiry lens, and human praxis animate Dr. Savage's work that highlights the brilliance, beauty, and depth and breadth of Blackness. We have Dr. Raúl Alberto Mora, who is an associate professor and a doctorate in education and affiliate faculty and a BA Spanish-English education, both housed in the School of Education and Pedagogy at the Universidad Pontificia Bolivariana in Medellin. He served in a visiting professor scholar and a guest lecturer at the universities of Colombia, Poland, Mexico, Chechnya, Brazil, the United States, Spain, and Norway. His current research explores the second language literacies in urban spaces and gaming communities, the pedagogical implementation of alternative literacies in second language education, and the need for critical frameworks in English language teaching. Plurilingualism in and from the Global South. He develops with the award-winning Literacies in Second Languages Projects, LSLP, Research Lab, in which he chairs at UPB. And then finally today we'll have Ms. Beza Wossene, who has been in the field of global education for 14 years with a focus on international student programming. She began her professional career as a teacher and guidance counselor in Southern China. After earning her master's degree from the University of Pennsylvania's Graduate School of Education, she continued her professional career as an international student support administrator at Dickinson College, and a few years later went on I'm in a place today, people. More recently, she's the director of international studies at St. Joe's Preparatory School, where she recruited and supported international and exchange students from Latin America, Asia, and Europe, all the while institutionalizing and bringing structure to the 5 faculty-led student abroad programs annually. Currently, Ms. Wossene is the Director of Global Programs at Penn State Abington. So welcome to our 3 panelists today. Thank you for bearing with me for that introduction. We'll go ahead and start out with Dr. Ming Fang He. Muted, go ahead.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute. I'm Ming Fang He. I was born in mainland China and grown up in the Cultural Revolution, which is a very big political turmoil in China. And also came to Canada to study for my master's degree. I have 2 master's degrees. One is in English education, one is in Master of Education. And then I also got my PhD in curriculum studies and teacher education, social foundation from University of Toronto. And in 1998, when I graduated from University of Toronto, got my PhD, I choose to come to Georgia. Georgia Southern is very close to Savannah, if you're familiar with Savannah. It's in the deep South. So I have been working at the Georgia Southern since 1998. So that's almost 25 years. And being an international faculty at the Georgia Southern University, so it's a very, very different experience because Georgia Southern is a very predominantly white institution in the South. And I remember the first impression when I work here, I give myself a metaphor. It's like a Chinese panda work among Georgia peaches. But you think Georgia peaches could be very amiable, and it's not true. Sometimes I experience a very much racism. I call them also nationalistic bias, like nationality bias. And still in our job ad nowadays at Georgia Southern, if you don't have H-1B status, you cannot apply for the faculty job at Georgia Southern. I have been fight against things for a long time at Georgia Southern. It still appear in the ad because they say it's a requirement from Georgia Board of Regents in Georgia. So they have to have a like status, otherwise they won't even allow you to apply. But when I applied for this job though, they were very friendly. Even the Georgia Southern University helped me, sponsor me, apply for the H-1B status so I can work here. As a Canadian, I'm a Canadian Chinese, so I can work in the United States for a certain period of time without the work permission because I automatically can work here. But imagine if you're from other country, you don't have working status and you are not able to stay here. But I have been working very, how many minutes I have, like each of us?
About 15.
15, okay. I just don't want to over talk. So I think the big challenge for me working in a predominantly white institution, particularly in the Deep South, is this tension and is the bias from different directions. And usually I remember when I came here, first of all, they don't count me as a minority at all. They group me into group of white because my skin look fairly white. But I was very uncomfortable, but they don't count me as a minority. So another thing is they have this stereotype about Asian women. We are very amiable. We never fight back, but I'm opposite. I will pick up a fight if I can. And I remember even before I get tenure, I began to fight for other people who has international status, because my belief is if I didn't start fight, I will never start fight. So I always fight with evidence. I fight with grace. I don't revenge on people, but I fight with evidence. I fight with grace. I also fight with a lot of evidence against it. That means if I begin to fight, nobody else can fight me back because I have all the evidence. Um, so we went through a lot of events in our university, which is very prejudiced against international students and the faculty. And what we do is we develop this faculty network, and the international, we have association called the Association of International Scholars and Students and Visiting Scholars. So we come together periodically and discuss some concerns. And the faculty representative in our group will bring those concerns to the presidential cabinet, and they have to deal with it. And I have been like acting as a faculty senate member all the time and speak for the international student, international faculty most of the time, because I point out the prejudice they have against the international students and faculty. And I also point out the policy from the document to show them you have this policy. You're not supposed to be prejudiced against us, but you do. So by doing that, and sometimes I do experience uh, some uh, some grief, some challenges. And for example, I remember I used to take upon an issue about one Jewish faculty on my campus, which is that Jewish faculty did have some misbehavior. And so I have to deal with it, take up on that. And after I take up on the misbehavior of that particular Jewish faculty, I was criticized being anti-Semitic, which is like group me into those people, really anti-Semitic, but I'm not. And so I have to deal with those grave issues, even include the Title IX office. And I have to have multiple talk with them and try to collect the evidence to prove I'm not anti-Semitic. I'm only against that certain behavior. So that's briefly my experience, and maybe I can add on later on if you have any questions, and how I emotionally and mentally handle this. And I think as international student and faculty on the campus, particularly in a predominant white institution in the Deep South, I think we have to really, being an international student and faculty, we have to taking care of ourselves, because a lot of time, a lot of invisible emotional damage happen all the time, and the emotional hurts to us because we have different perspective. We live life in between cultures, languages, and locations, physical geography locations. We have different perspective. For example, when people criticize about tyrannic government in China, people don't understand that they themselves, their government is tyrannic. And so you are at the position, you almost like when people criticize your own home country, you know what's wrong with your home country because you left your home country because something wrong with your home country. And but when you hear the criticism, you only hear one side of criticism. They don't criticize their own government, or they only criticize very one-sided view, point of view. So that's kind of what I really feel strongly is academically, emotionally, and also physically, we have to taking care of ourselves. in order to be strong, because as the international student faculty exist in the public university or whatever university you work in United States, you need a really thick skin and you need a lot of energy to fight back all the odds. And the people cannot imagine. I remember, for example, as a graduate student, international graduate student, when people went back and have holiday, come back and talk about how much they enjoy the holiday, all I think about is I was waiting the table as a waitress in the restaurant to earn extra money in order to phone my family in China. Because at that time, early 90s, or even late 90s, still the telephone conversation is very costly, and people don't know that. And people don't know a lot of things we experience. It's invisible burden we carry with us. And also constantly, if something happened to your own family in your own home country, you will receive a phone call because of time difference in the midnight or even past midnight. You have to deal with all those emotionally, and also you have to handle all those stress and the challenges. Nobody else understand that. And so my takeaway from my experience as an international faculty and a scholar and a student is we have to be really taking care of ourselves, because if you don't take care of yourself, nobody else cares. Except maybe your colleagues and a couple of allies you have. Otherwise, you are alone. Another thing is, how can I say, we don't have to be martyr against all the odds, but we have to be sort of think of ourselves as sometimes it's contradictory for myself, is I cannot represent all the Chinese on my campus, but people perceive me as representational. So whatever I do, what I say represent my race, represent my ethnic groups. And so I'm aware of that. But meanwhile, even among my ethnic group, I don't agree with most of them. For example, about this election, I'm totally different from most of the people here, so-called Chinese. Even among Chinese, we have so many different ethnic groups. So that complexity is inside of my own group and also outside our own group. But I do believe we need to develop almost, I called, diaspora community. We have to come together in some way, share ideas, share our emotions, and otherwise you cannot fight all those by yourself. Okay, let's stop right here.
Thank you so much for those words, and particularly drawn to the idea of how do we create community, and what does that mean when we think about community as sometimes just spaces to heal, spaces to be able to have voice, and what does that mean then to invite other parts of our communities into those moments. So thank you for those thoughts today. I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic to Dr. Savage.
Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. I'm excited to be here with all of you and to be in community. And I appreciate this opportunity, Dr. Wossene, to be here and to be a part of the esteemed team of speakers and panelists today. So my name is Shawn Savage. I was born on the beautiful island of Jamaica. My mother is Cynthia Griffiths Allen. My pops is Arthur John Savage. But I also have step-parents, so I refer to Hyacinth Robinson Savage as well as Doddridge Allen. And I center that because that is the community and the culture from which I've come and from which I'm joining you today. And they're with me in more than one ways. So having been born in Jamaica, I came here for my graduate studies at Boston College initially. And I did both a master's and my doctoral work there. While I was there, I participated a lot with the Office of International Students and Scholars. I became the international president for the Graduate Student Association. I was a part of the Senate for the university in terms of student leadership and that kind of a thing. And also worked in student affairs like in Res Life, etc. Right? So I've had a multitude of opportunities to engage with people on campus who are international students, right? But also with scholars who are international students. And what was very interesting is often, despite the fact of our kind of rank, right, student, right, versus scholars, in terms of professionals in the academy, you'd often find that our stories, right, reflected some of the same themes, our joys, right, like we're kind of united around some of the same things. And so therefore, when, Ming Fang mentioned earlier, this idea of being in community, I thought of the value of community, right, to navigating what it means to be an international student and scholar, right? I think of it as a kind of navigating multiple consciousnesses, right? Kind of alluding to Du Bois' idea of double consciousness, but extending even to the idea of the intersectionality that Kimberly Crenshaw and others have spoken about, right? So this Black male Jamaican, right, with a distinctive accent and probably multiple accents by at this point, right, having studied in the US, bringing my Jamaican and Caribbean background, etc. And also the different ways in which I might pronounce a word, right? The places of emphasis, the cadences in my voice, and other linguistic kind of differences, they make you very distinctive, right? They make you stand out in whatever space you occupy as student or scholar. But I also feel like part of being an international student and scholar is about contributing to and enhancing the culture of faculty, classroom experiences, right, and just community experiences writ large. So I see it not just as this navigational experience of trying to figure out, okay, I'm all of these things, right, in this space. And often people make assessments or judgments about you because of one thing they know, right? Because of one way that you might present in the world that is visible, because of one way that might make you very identifiable. But they don't necessarily get the complexity of our humanity, right? And so one of the things that I've seen is that they often assume that international students, as well as scholars, in terms of faculty members who are part of the academy, that we don't understand, right? Like somehow because of our linguistic background, somehow because of our geographical distinctions where we grew up, that we don't understand things here. There's also the belief often that international students, people are not natural born, right? US citizens have limitations, right? And that's a constant thing that I saw from a lot of the international students while they were students. They felt like whether it was in group work, right? Or from the faculty, some of the faculty they had, there were always these assumptions about them having limitations. And so I think of how do we combat that, right? How do we address that? One of the points is creating communities of solidarity, right? Because that allows us a space to unpack, to process the experiences, and hopefully to also heal in the process, right? But it also is a place for us to strategize about how, as Ming Fang spoke earlier, how do we get these administrations, right, these institutions to begin working in more favorable ways that help to alleviate some of the burdens, right, the kind of navigational stresses that international scholars face. And so my experience has been that because I'm Jamaican, because sometimes my hair might be out, sometimes it might be cornrowed, right? Even there might be a question around, is this really a serious, right, scholar? Because I present in ways that are not necessarily quite normative in the academy. But I think that's part of what we need to do is to bring all of who we are into the academy. That means even in our pedagogies, right? We need to allow space for students to be able to bring their own cultures and identities in the room. It means even with our assignments that perhaps we're not just providing Eurocentric or American-centric assignments, but that we allow for them to pull on the content they're learning in our courses and connect that very directly with their backgrounds and their experiences and their own country systems and structures, right? And so I think of those as some of the ways that we can enhance the international experience, whether we are in the capacity of faculty or student, right? We do not have limitations. We're beautiful, wonderful human beings who make a really important contribution to any space that we occupy, and we should walk in that power. I look forward to having further questions and conversations around this throughout the rest of the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those beautiful words. I particularly appreciate this idea of bringing your full self, your full and authentic self. And when we think about campus cultures and just sort of the ecosystems altogether, this idea of really having the you, when we think about campus diversity and diversity of voice and perspective, I think that's impossible to do unless we create and maintain spaces for our international colleagues and students to have not just a voice and a seat at the table, but also to have their full selves. So thank you. Okay, so I have next Dr. Raúl Alberto Mora.
Well, first of all, I want to resonate with what Dr. Ming Fang He and Dr. Shawn Savage said about being in community. I appreciate being here, and I greet you in this liminal space that I live in, where my job is in Medellin, in the ancestral lands of the Embera, the Zenú, and the Kunatule originary nations of Colombia. And as I live in Trondheim in Norway, in the ancestral lands of the Sami peoples of northern Norway and the northern part of Scandinavia. So important to always recognize where we stand in terms of culture, language, and life. I come to you as someone who has been an international scholar for 22 years already. Counting my first part of my journey began in 2002 when I got a Fulbright scholarship to pursue my master's at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where I also did my doctorate. And then I've been an international scholar, or rather, I like to think of myself as a non-Anglo, Global South, global scholar since for the past 14, since I graduated from my PhD, taking up on multiple roles of advocacy and mentoring, including support that I've given to the Fulbright Commission in Colombia and the different visiting professorships I had over the course of my career. And I come to that thinking two moments. First of all, what does it mean to be an international student? And then what does it mean to be an international scholar? Thinking that some of the grad students, they're not going to be students forever. They have to graduate, kind of the immortal words of Raúl Alberto Mora, because grad students don't get tenure, so we have to graduate. And one of the first things I want to talk about is being mindful of the political landscape, home and away. And I'll just quickly go with a quick little example of what I mean by that. I was awarded my Fulbright scholarship on September, I think it was, I got the letter on September 7th, 2001. And you know what happened 4 days later in 2001? Yeah, after September 11, as an international student, I spent a month freaking out because I was hoping that the US State Department did not decide to make one of those knee-jerk reactions that sometimes governors do, and they decide to revoke Fulbright scholarships because that's the right move. That was the best move. So I actually spent several months in a lot of anguish, hoping that the US government did not decide to revoke the Fulbright. Fortunately, they did not. But I remember going in the first year, 2002, and how different it felt. And then I was there when Barack Obama became president, how different the landscape on campuses was. And I was there when Virginia Tech happened. I was in Champaign, but if you're at a college campus and you hear a shooting at another campus, you start thinking this could have been us. And if you're on a college campus, it has been you at some point. And it's important to understand that those things trigger us equally. I mean, I'm Colombian, so I come from a history of a lot of turmoil in my country. Things are getting better, but we've had moments. So those things are important to always keep in mind, that the political landscape that what happens in the US sometimes resonates with what happens in your home country and vice versa, and that you're always navigating this liminal space that everything hits you from both sides. And bringing that sensitivity is important because as international students, international scholars, we're also constantly dealing with languaging barriers. One thing is that we have to also once we get there, regardless of our command of the language, in this case, English, and I can pride myself saying that I have, over my career, I've had a lot of privilege in the sense that the way I speak English doesn't sound like, it sounds like someone who was educated in the United States. So that has given me privileges to advocate for other people and for international scholars, for doctoral students. And understanding that when you are dealing with studies in your second language, you're not only trying to learn the everyday language. I was trying to pick up, trying to sound like, I'm going to get into the Midwestern, and I'm an adopted Midwestern by heart, because 8 years in the cornfields, you become a Midwestern by heart. But at the same time, I'm also trying to understand this whole academic thing. The first papers I used to write with my master's, I actually wrote them with the APA manual on my lap, because I had no idea what that was. Like APA, and I'm like, and then they switched APA 5 to 6 when I was writing my dissertation. And that is the worst time APA can choose to change the manual. When you're dissertating and you're writing the findings chapter, and they change the manual, and you have to recalibrate the entire dissertation, and you're writing in another language, that's not fun. But you do it because we're survivors. We thrive. We're fighters. But it's important to create these spaces where we have to help, because it's like there are things about the language that, no matter how good your commander is, there are things about the academic language that are not natural. There are things about understanding the social conventions of academic writing in English that are not natural. That if you don't belong to those networks, you're never gonna get them. There are these little codes, I like to call them the secret handshakes, that happen in these spaces that international students don't know because no one has told them. So part of helping international students become scholars is literally telling them, as the saying goes, literally telling them and explaining them and showing them how the sausage is made. Because no one has told you that. Even when you take ESL classes, you take English classes in college, there are things about academic writing, academic discourse, and how to communicate as a scholar that no one's told you. And then if you're in that position of being an international scholar, pay it forward. Of course, that's the other part. Pay it forward. Which kind of brings me to and of course, there's issues about sensitivity. As I said, situations happen, and you have added hurdles. I was just reading an article about Colombian doctoral students dealing with issues with funding and visas, and I'm like, yeah, I can resonate with that. Like, yeah, when you have to write your dissertation, but if you don't finish quickly enough, they're gonna revoke your visa and they're gonna get deported. That is like the 3,000 meter steeplechase, but the little pool has crocodiles. Yeah, if you do the Olympics, that one little pool, that one has crocodiles and piranhas. And that's what it's like to dissertate when you have to think about the visa as well. So always keep that sensitivity. And of course, in terms of the language, the sensitivity, something as simple as say the name right, or ask how you say the name. Keep in mind those little things, like my name is Raúl, and it has a little accent. Putting I'm not gonna make a big fuss if you don't put it, but if you put it, I'm gonna smile. I'm gonna be very grateful. And it's okay. You don't have to say Raúl. Most of us Latinos don't like to roll the R's because that's a little weird. If you say it like that, it's a little weird. But we don't do that. But I know that sometimes Asians have that particular problem that they come up with 1,000 ways they find 1,000 ways to butcher their names, and they smile about it. So, but asking, it's important, that sensitivity, and even the questions and the cultural references you make. I'm Colombian, so I've heard it all. I've had the references to Shakira, to Sofia Vergara, to Encanto, to James, to Valderrama. I'm old enough to that. And of course, yes, and I've also heard, and I have inevitably somebody asked me about Pablo Escobar. And I politely explain the classical question, have you seen Narcos? And I say, no, I saw it live. That's when people ask me if I ever saw Narcos. I say, no, I saw the live broadcast. It was all over the streets of my hometown. Thank you for, but yeah, actually it was much better. I mean, it was a lot worse than what Netflix showed you. You don't want to know what you go watch Netflix. You cannot handle the live broadcast. It will be too much for you. Because they ask me questions, and of course the question about, the powder. I got the powder question. I've gotten that question too. And we take it in stride, but I would say no. Sure, but avoid the pop culture references. Just let the people tell you what they want to be remembered by. Now, just to wrap it up, the question of what does it mean to be an international scholar or a non-Anglo scholar or a global scholar? Because again, if there are grad students in the crowd, you're going to graduate, and you're not going to cease to be Asian. You're not going to cease to be Caribbean. You're not going to cease to be Latine. You're not gonna stop being European or Eastern European or African. You'll still be that. Even if you get another passport, you'll still be. I'll always be Colombian. No matter how many passports I get, I'll always be Colombian, and I'm very proud one of that. And that means that we have to always be in a sense of, as we climb up these educational ladders, what kind of advocacy we're going to start engaging in. Like, for example, what kind of advocacy are we going to engage in? So journals and publishers begin to create a better, a more flexible understanding that, listen, not everybody writes in American or British English. There are like about 20 or 30 different native speaker varieties of English, and there are about 200 varieties of English if you count every country that has one. And yes, and can we accommodate? I think we can accommodate, especially in a digital era. Do we have to do everything APA 7? Sure, I can deal with that. Let's do APA 7. Let me write in my English. I'll do APA 7. I'm fine. I mean, hey, tit for tat. I mean, like, I know what hill I'm gonna die on. I'm not gonna die in the APA hill if I'm gonna have to fight the World Englishes hill. I'm not gonna die in the APA hill. I'll fight the World Englishes one. Thank you. It is all, but yeah, so that sense of advocacy and that sense of whose voices you're going to help amplify and what stories you're going to help bring to the forefront, because some of us are fortunate enough that we can write in multiple languages and we can tell the stories in multiple languages. Not everybody in our home countries can write in those languages, and some of them don't want to, some of them just can't. And there are people, so how do we use this possibility of navigating languages to tell stories and to bring stories to the foreground? Because I think that's also part of being an international scholar or a global scholar or a global South scholar or a non-Anglo scholar, however you want to frame it. I understand what Ming Fang was saying about, in a way, you become an ambassador of your race and your country, your ethnicity, even if you don't want to. Sometimes it happens. And once you realize, yeah, I'm gonna have to wear that mantle. What am I gonna do with it? I'm gonna have to wear that cape. Then what am I gonna do? What am I gonna do with that? Once I have to wear that cape, what am I gonna do? Whose voices am I gonna work for? How am I going to mentor the generations coming right behind me? Some of the younger doc students that are coming to our universities, and because when they know you're an international scholar, they're going to gravitate to you anyway. On campuses, at a conference, through academia, through ResearchGate, they're going to be looking for you. So what kind of advocacy do you want to be engaged in? Because you're going to have to. If you're an international scholar, if you're thinking yourself globally, advocacy is going to be the name of the game. Whether you choose to do it or whether you want to step up, or you choose to retreat. And retreat it tells us exactly what you want to do. But if you're going to be in the forefront, then these are things we have to consider, that we, in many cases, will be voices for other scholars who no one wants to hear from, or no one has given them the bullhorn. And how we're going to do to make sure they get the bullhorn eventually. So I'll just stop right there, because I want to make sure that we have part for the community. But thank you, everybody, for allowing me the chance to share this stream of consciousness with all of you on this lovely afternoon/evening.
Thank you. Particularly thank you, Raúl, as I know it's it's the evening time for you there in Norway. So thank you for taking the time your evening. And I especially appreciate this focus on mentoring, right? What's the next step that we take as scholars from minoritized backgrounds. And that's an important one, and at the same time, an exhausting one, right? As we ourselves wrestle with past and present and potentially future oppressions, and then think about what that means to interrupt that for the next generation. So thank you for thinking about that with us today. So finally, we have Ms. Beza Wossene. I cannot speak today to save my life. I'm so sorry. We'll go ahead and I'm gonna make sure that sharing capacity is open.
It's open.
It is. Well, I've already done my job then. I'll go ahead and pass the mic to you.
Thanks so much, Bonnie. I was just thinking as my co-panelists were speaking how excited I would be to have been a student in your class, Dr. Savage, Dr. Mora, Dr. He. I think, I mean, that's what we're looking for. And I hope at Penn State Abington, our faculty are as welcoming and understanding as you are. Today I'm presenting PowerPoint. I hope it's okay that okay, so right now it's disabled, Bonnie, sorry. I had checked it earlier. So I'm gonna share a PowerPoint presentation more on the pragmatic part of higher education. Since I'm in administration, I think I'm the only one that's not a faculty member. All right, it's working now. So when you say international perspectives, I always think more about worldview. I focus a lot on students that study abroad. So I ask them upon their return, how has your worldview changed? Mine certainly has changed a few times. And today I just want to focus on these 3 times when it changed. When I came to the US in '96, when I went to work in China in 2010, and then of course, after the whole world changed after 2020. I wanted to talk a little bit about my background. My mother tongue is actually called Amharic. Here's a little bit about the alphabet. We have, I think, over 100 characters, and it's set in a chart kind of form where you put the consonant next to the vowel. So if you get all the consonants, the rest of the letters really fall into place. And so I thought my language was pretty simple. And then when I came to the US, we moved to Ohio in 1996, communicating with classmates with 0 English language skills, you know, outside of maybe Michael Jackson lyric here or there. That didn't really help me out. So it was, I mean, my worldview was challenged in every way imaginable. Ethiopia tends to be, you know, our values and principles are very different. We're community-based, very collective. It's really against the individual and selfishness and things of that nature. We see things that you do for yourself as selfish. And so coming here, it was very different for me. And so I want to dedicate this presentation to my father, who passed this year, who told me the best advice I've gotten yet, which is we don't necessarily have to assimilate, meaning giving up all the things that make us who we are. We just need to include the best of American culture with the best of our own culture. So that's what I've been using. And literally, I've been here, you know, almost 3 decades. And I'm constantly in decision-making, confronting those 2 sides. I just had this little blurb up here because when we came in '96, we were part of what was called the brain drain, which I'm interested in investigating it in the future somehow with my research, where in the Harvard School of Public Health, I believe, they said in 2012 that there were more Ethiopian doctors working in the city of Chicago than the whole of Ethiopia, which is pretty scary. That's directly connected to the brain drain. And in the mid-90s, when we got this thing called the diversity visa, it's kind of called the lottery visa. There there were just millions of skilled professionals leaving out of Africa, and most came from Nigeria, Egypt, and Ethiopia. So just wanted to highlight that phenomenon because it was interesting to me. So in 2010, I wanted to talk about how my worldview changed again, having the opportunity to teach in China. As you know, economically, the US wasn't in the most stable place in 2008, 2009 when I graduated from college. So all of us millennials from Canada, UK, Australia found ourselves in very welcoming cities throughout China. So this is Zhongshan, it's in the south. I also worked in Jinhua. And there I was considered a native English speaker, which was really interesting because my entire, the formative years that I spent in the US, I was constantly battling, the identity question between being Ethiopian, being American. And so, having it take, coming here when you're young, it only really took a year to learn English. But culturally, I was just feeling so different. And then finally, after college, when I had this opportunity to go to China, it was just very interesting that I think one of the speakers said, I think it was Dr. Mora who said, speaking English as someone who was educated in the US, that's just the best way to define it, because though it wasn't my first language, because this is how my accent sounds, I was able to get this opportunity to work there. And so I had wondered if I had a different accent, would I have had that opportunity after all, even though I would have had, the merit to work there, so that was interesting to me. So continuing on, so I did my, poli-sci work. And then after that, after graduate school, I was able to work in liberal arts colleges and then found myself here at Penn State. So I'm, in my work, we're constantly comparing the two in terms of how inclusive are they when it comes to their international population. Liberal arts colleges I worked at, I'll definitely give them props in terms of the fact that we had robust and full onboarding for international faculty, but we didn't have those international faculty do any sort of mentorship of international students, which we kind of fell short there. Liberal arts colleges tend to be more centralized. There will be two staff and somebody part-time who's managing 250 international students on campus. They'll have international orientation, but it wasn't anything that you could measure as, did the students really understand the resources on campus? Did they connect with domestic and other international students and make a cohort? Well, so it's, and also because those orientations would change year to year. You would hear something at NAFSA or one of these regional conferences, okay, like we need to improve it in this way. So the following year it would change. And then students would come back and give us feedback like, I wish you would have done this. And I think that having advisory boards with students, I didn't have that bullet point here, I wish I did, but liberal arts colleges typically have advisory boards where we listen to international students and their take on programming and what their needs are, and we would refocus it on the next year's programs. Now, the other challenge here was that we didn't really, so the English courses seemed more like ESL courses than anything. It would have probably benefited students to have intensive writing in there, some resource sharing. We do that here in the AIMS program at Penn State. So that has been a really successful program that we want to continue. And then liberal arts colleges were just starting to have programming for international students in their, in their housing. So living learning communities. At Penn State, we have the Global Village in our residential homes. So that has been really successful. Other ways that at Penn State, it's been a little bit different is that we're completely decentralized, I would say. I mean, I bet you could find examples where people typically come to us if they have a question of international students, and we want them to. But we look to, so OGP is the Office of Global Programs at Abington. We also look to Penn State University Park Global, who they help us with, everything having to do orientation, which we call welcome days. They train our peer mentors early in the summer so that those mentors are able to support international students. And so I think that peer-to-peer really supports inclusion and that sense of belonging on campus. You hear that over and over again with a diverse international population that we have. We do have a new faculty mentorship program that's just starting. We tested it out last year. There's a lot we need to do to improve, but that came straight out from, I want to shout out our Asian American affinity group faculty members who said, you know what, I have a little bit of time. This is the type of service I want to do. So I think we really need to make more of those connections as we know mentorship is really pivotal for our students. Our campus is interested in having more international students, so I'm happy about that. That seems like they want to prioritize international students being there, but it shouldn't be obviously for economic reasons, right? We really have to think about DEIB and how we're going to retain the students, make sure they have a positive experience rather than just focusing on the quantity. Talked about those other two things. So feel free to ask questions about any of those. I'm not going too deep into many of them. And then finally, I wanted to talk about how, in 2021, we saw just a major loss nationally of our international student population because of COVID. And so that means major changes in budgets. And so these are like lots of big picture things I wanted to focus on. And so with staff wearing multiple hats or getting kind of pulled in different directions in different departments, there's less time for staff to do professional development or serve on committees where they can kind of preach the gospel of what it is like to serve international students. What is it that the Office of Global Programs does? I wish we had more time to get out there for that. But those things are getting limited now. And it's very difficult to start new programs. We once again, I mentioned we have quite a nice number of international faculty. So just figuring out what percentage those numbers are on our campus and supporting the international faculty on our campus would be great. We had a really fun like a happy hour kind of dinner for our global faculty. And so they asked a lot of questions. We talked about global citizenship, what that means for our campus. And so going forward, I want to touch back with that group and see what we can do. And then we are basically asking student organizations to have a larger role for inclusivity without really directly asking them, right? Typically, they do events for the Lunar New Year or, a lot of different entertaining cultural events, which are really needed. But we are hoping maybe in the future, sorry about that typo, that we could, work with them for more impactful events. Since we are limited on staff, I wonder if more student leaders would be able to work with us. And then, so the two, I guess I should have explained these. So this is kind of, some of the challenges we're experiencing, and then this side is opportunities. The opportunity is really time to strategize and envision a plan for the future. We may not have been too great at strategizing in 2019 when we had so many international students. We were just excited to have them. And so we built, an entire department around that. But now going forward, let's really think about retention, inclusion before continuing to bring more international students. So I want to consider more about a cultural exchange, right? Typically, when you have these conversations, people are asking, what are international students contributing to your campus? And you have to measure that and figure that out. But I say, how are we contributing to their life? It should be an exchange. So, through the way that we send students abroad to like embedded and semester-long study abroad programs would be one way, so that those students that they're sitting next to in the classroom are not confused about the difference between ethnicity and race, for example, right? We know that a majority of Americans don't have their passport. So I want to make sure that a majority of Abington students have gotten the chance to go out there and get a passport and have gone on a short-term trip abroad with us. That's one major way we can increase global awareness and make the classroom environment even more welcoming, because they'll just be able to ask more interesting questions and have those cultural exchanges and relationships with international students. And we may not have to engineer it as much as we had to in the past. Yes. Finally, I just want to say, you know, thanks to University Park hearing the Commonwealth campuses, we have our very first World Campus Doctorate program, and it's in education. I'm part of the first cohort from fall 2023. And these are a couple of the things that I'm thinking about going forward. And I hope I can reach our panelists and other people that are participating here as I think through, you know, the type of research I want to do. One thing I want to focus on our campus is how to cultivate this global advisory board that we have, for example. This global advisory board we have on our campus has been able to kind of review proposals for study abroad programs and look at international student emergency funds. But I wonder if we can add more international students there and ask them questions about, what did you think about your international welcome days? Things like that, to once again help us improve what we're doing and meet their needs. So yeah, on the right is just a list of questions that I'm interested in, because our office is now tasked with enrolling and supporting international students from, you know, from high school and then carrying them all the way through to graduation. So I want to focus on high school age international students and ask them questions in a focus group setting to see, you know, what are their needs, what are their parents' needs, how can we get info sessions to them? Do they need translators in those info sessions? Do they have an understanding of the misinformation that people may have in the US about, you know, country X? Especially being from Ethiopia, it was really relentless, the amount of questions I would get about, you know, things that are, you know, that had happened in one decade in Ethiopia, for example, and just didn't color the country in a positive way. And it wasn't my experience. So I wish I kind of knew that before I came here. So yeah, so those are some of my questions. And I think that working more with international student athletes and other what is it? I believe that it was Dr. Savage who had a term for the local communities. Yeah, communities of solidarity, you said. So those are the things that I kind of want to think outside of the box, think outside of campus, and have more inclusivity with those different community groups. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you, Beza, for that. There's this nugget that you were talking about the duodirectional nature, right? And how do we understand the duodirectional nature of questions of belonging and cultural exchanges and things like that with our international colleagues and students, that I think is so important, that we often miss. And then, you know, what does that preparation look like for our international students, and how can we make that not just more smooth, but altogether think about the ways that we can enhance questions of belonging in everything we do. And a lot of that coming back to actually just doing the simple task of asking a question, right? That question, the idea of curiosity before knowing all of the answers. And I think that's so important. How do we make sure we're asking questions rather than assuming we know the answers, particularly about our international student populations? Young people have their own sense of identities. We know from culturally sustaining pedagogies that's both pulled together and torn apart from things like social media. And so I think it's important that we consider those overlaps. So thank you so much. We have a little bit of time. I wanted to make sure that folks, if you had questions, not for the panelists, maybe just questions in general to think about, what it means to make campuses more welcoming to international colleagues and students. I thought I'd open up the space now. Rosa?
Hi, everybody. My name is Rosa Chisholm, and I'm at Penn State Abington. Beza, I like a lot. Is that how you pronounce your name? Okay. I like how you were what you introduced on everybody, of course. I just wanted to add that I like that you included you in your. It's important for you to include the parents, maybe in their native language, which I think was a good point. I don't know how much that can be done with international students because sometimes they just get here by themselves, maybe via Zoom. I don't know, like something with the parents. But I just want to say that's a very important part because I help a lot at Penn State Abington when the students are visiting the schools. We have a day for students, minority students. And I happen, after the presentation and everything, sometimes we're separated in groups, and I happen to go with a person who's going to work with Hispanic parents, especially if they want something in their language. So we go to a different room, and not with the students, and students are somewhere else. They're doing other things. It's just the parents. And she explains everything about the school and loans and everything else in Spanish. And I'm there just as a faculty member to share and support and all that. And I've always found that a very, very important thing to do for the parents. So thank you for thinking of that.
Yeah, you're welcome. I mean, we start really strong in terms of international student welcome days, and we have the parents and guests in a lot of different programs where we get to know them, and we even have student leaders that translate sometimes during the sessions. But after we tell them, you're not allowed to check, your child's grades, and they have to be, after that, and then they go home, it's just they're figuring things out by themselves until graduation. So there's got to be more done in the middle. I agree.
Thank you, Rosa. Appreciate it. Kimberly.
Hi, everyone. Great conversation. I'm quite enjoying it, of course. For those of you who know me, I love these types of conversations. So just great conversations overall. Kind of piggybacking off of, I think it might have been Professor Ming He. I think you were the one who said it about not necessarily always wanting. We know our responsibility that we are the face of a particular culture, but we don't always want to be the face of it. But I think also taking that responsibility very seriously and intentionally. That as an international person, especially if you are in a position of administration or faculty where you are student facing, really recognizing that many students or other faculty members may never interact with another person from your culture for perhaps an extended period of time, and you are the standard for when they are getting ready to interact with another person from your culture. So just knowing what that will translate to for them as they interact with your cultural men and women, whether you agree often with the things that
I'm sorry, Kim. I don't know if it's just me, but I cannot follow you. Is that just me? The
No,
microphone, I cannot.
a bit.
Okay, okay. I just want to make sure it's just not me. Thank you.
About that. Are you hearing me any better now?
Yes.
Yeah, I forgot my headphone had shorts. completely forgot that it had shorts. But I was just saying that just really being conscious of our responsibility that we are the standard bearers, whether we might want to or not. We are the standard bearers for the next person that they interact with from our culture, right? So of course, I'm personally very proud to have listened to Dr. Shawn Savage, because I heard his accent and I was like, yes, go Jamaica, go Caribbean, go, because this is the standard by which other professors, other Caribbean people are going to be not necessarily judged, but there's an expectation, right? And so I do just saying that to also segue to as faculty, especially when we're in our classrooms, using our platform in meaningful ways. The books that we choose to use can be influenced by our culture. The content that we choose to share can be influenced by our culture. Like for Beza, the places, that we choose to take our students can be influenced by our culture. And so, and if you are not an international person and you're trying to integrate that into meaningful ways, finding a colleague and saying, okay, can you recommend a book? Can you come and speak to my class? Can you suggest a place for me to go to and a way in which I could integrate this into my classroom experience also? So I just wanted to put that out there, kind of coming off of all of what was said before. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Beside what you said, actually, when I listened to every speaker speak out about your experience, another thing I think I realized is important for us to admit to we have multiple sense of belonging. That means as an international person in any spaces, we have multiple sense of belonging. So sometimes you don't feel you belong to a certain group. You don't have to, so you have your in-between spaces and you can belong anywhere you feel you belong. So that does not mean you shouldn't enclose yourself. Don't reach out. It's just that you can settle down with a sense of multiple sense of belonging rather than one single sense of belonging. So if I don't feel comfortable about a certain group, maybe that's the way it is. Maybe I don't want to belong to that group. For example, my campus, some group, I don't want to belong to them because they are very prejudiced and I will never belong to that group. So that's okay. And the other thing is, I think as an international student and the faculty and the scholar and the international workers, I think another thing very important is we should keep our bilingualness and multilingualness and multiculturalness and multilingualness in our writing without allow other people to sabotage our voice and the signature. Because, for example, I love Amy Tan's writing because Amy Tan's writing is so perfect in English, but she has a Chinese accent in her writing. That's the beauty of her writing. I don't want to write it like, I can never write like Toni Morrison, and I cannot write like other people, but you have your own signature and a voice, and without, you shouldn't allow other people to sabotage your voice, and you try to conform to the norm. Usually people write. That way we become very boring. So keep the excitementness of your language and also your culture, your heritage in your writing.
And
So that's a strategy, So thank you.
If I may just add to that a little bit, I think often when people immigrate to the US, in fact, I think a few years ago, there was some article by an immigration expert of sorts, right, to international students and scholars who are coming to the US. And one of the tips they provided was the first thing you need to do is to lose the accent, because people associate an accent with incompetence, right, lack of knowledge, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm like, when we think about it, there's an entire ecosystem that is designed with violence, right, against our linguistic diversities, against the ways in which we show up in the world. And so to your point then, Ming Fang, is like, it's crucially important then to ensure that you are retaining that, right? So listening to Kimberly, for example, you know, you hear her cadence, she's still maintaining her Jamaican-ness. We often, even in classroom spaces as students, have to think about, how do we represent ourselves here? Do we retain the kind of authentic use of English that we would in our own country and context? Or do we, you know, assimilate, right, essentially, to the ways of being and speaking in the academy, in our classrooms and in other spaces we occupy? So there's a kind of explicit and implicit pressure to lose the accent. But my encouragement today is the advice of others who have shared, is that we have to bring all of who we are into those spaces, because otherwise, one, there's no representation of us, right? And then secondly, it perpetuates assumptions, negative assumptions about us, rather than dispel them, right? And so we have a role to play in an active way in dispelling some of those things, but also caring for each other, because it can be quite laborious, right? It can be quite a burden to carry. But we also, as we've said, you know, have strategies that we need to use to be able to navigate all of it. Thank you.
Mhm. I even tell my undergraduate students, and when I teach them, at the right front, I will say, I speak English with my accent, but I would like you to consider, when you hear other people speaking English with accent, that person must be able to speak other language. And in order to, you know, learn from other people, the accent is not a negative thing. But you needed to consider other people with accent. They must know other culture and other places and other language.
Beautifully said. Thank you. Go ahead, Jim. Jim?
I am the lone non-academic on this call, I believe. I'm a member of the Penn State Abington Advisory Board, and thank you for allowing me to attend today. My eyes are open about some things. I have some follow-ups to do with a couple of the Penn State Abington people, so I'll do it offline by email. But it was a great eye-opener from today, and thank you so much for allowing me to be here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And thank you for being here. And as Jim said, the only lone non-academic in this space. I think that's important, though, that we open up these sorts of things to community, right? Because it's not as if our international folks here on our campus are not a part of the broader communities. You know, I'm always reminded of, you know, I've got a 7-year-old and a 13-year-old at home. And, you know, the 7-year-old has just grown out of that phase in his life where he doesn't think that the teacher like lives in the school, right? He realizes that she leaves school and goes home. And in the same sort of vein, it's not as though our international colleagues and students are just here and isolated to this campus, right? And so thinking about the communities that are touched by and that touch international students, I think and colleagues, I think it's important to think about what those bridges look like, and how we do our community work then with that in mind as an undergirding factor, rather than this side thing that we do. Rather, you know, it's not, we're going to think about this, and oh yes, we also must think within the DEI framework about the service that we do for international populations. And so really appreciate you being here, and all of us thinking about broader community questions.
The one thing that I learned in business, and I traveled all over so many of the countries that were mentioned today. I've been there, and I've worked there, and I visited there, and I was always encouraged, I better learn more than saying, please, thank you, where's the bathroom, and can I have a beer, please? I learned more than that before I went to a lot of countries. But this whole concept of multiculturalism, and again, I think I'm probably the oldest guy on this call too, to have an open mind and to learn those things, I think is really important. And since I've been involved at Abington, my eyes are really open about that. And I want to learn more about that and be a better advocate for all of you to get things done on campus.
Other thoughts, feelings, questions?
I wanted to get to a moment back to some of the things Rosa was talking about in terms of the family, because I mean, when you're an international student, And I'm saying it right now in the sense that my family is going through it's basically reliving the same story that happened to me 20 years ago when I went to the US. Now it's my nieces who are studied their undergrads in Portugal. So of course, for my mom, it's basically been deja vu. For my sister, she's now living what my mom had to deal with when I moved. So it's always interesting how sometimes families don't know how to deal with, especially if it's first generation. I mean, at least in the case of my nieces, they're second generation international students. So I mean, now they have an uncle in Norway they can call whenever their minds are going in a whirlpool. But I'm thinking about a lot of the international students who go into our schools to pursue undergrads or the masters or the PhDs, and many of them, they're first generation international students, sometimes first generation grad students, first generation PhD students. Families don't know how to navigate that. I always remember one day my mom, in the middle of writing a dissertation, she asked me a question: what can I do? My mom, and I could see the genuine concern in my mom, like, how can I support you? And I just said, pray for me every single day, because everything else, like, I'm working with my advisor. I just said like that, like, pray for me, light that candle, and that helps, because everything else I got an advisor. But at least reassuring them that thoughts and prayers at that moment that's a moment where they can help. There are other moments where we don't want thoughts and prayers, we want action, we want policy. But when it comes to your family, thoughts and prayers can go a long way, and especially in reassuring them that that's the role they can play. I mean, I understand, because I also work with a lot of my doctoral students are now in Colombia. They have families, they're married, they have children, and part of the job is actually saying, yeah, like, you have to talk to your spouse, you have to talk to your children to let them know this is what's going to happen, and this is the role you have to play. You cannot play an academic role in the sense that you cannot, sorry children, sorry kids, you cannot help your dad fix the headings of some headings in the ATA citations. That's your dad's or your mom's job. But there's a role you can play that I can't as the advisor, as the mentor. There are things I cannot do for my students that their families can. But it's also telling them explicitly, this is what you can do. This is how you can support. That is, I mean, because I really love when Shawn was talking about community and this notion of really building the village, or Bonnie, as Bonnie knows, my hashtag, the Worldwide Academic Fam. It's about building the fam. How we build a community, but in the sense that when you become an international student, become an international scholar, you don't have to be detached, not just from your language, from your community, from your fam. Now, bring the fam and make sure, but again, that's a role that we as mentors, we have that role to tell families, look, this is what you can do to help. Because again, I have doc students and master students, and they're married, and their husbands, their wives, they don't know how to help. So I'm just saying, listen, this is what you can do. This is the kind of support you can offer. And it's as simple as bring a cup of coffee, bring a cup of tea, give them a hug, or don't give them a hug at that moment. Like, learn to read the room, but they don't know how to deal with that. I'm one of the lucky few that when I was writing my dissertation, my fiance was doing her postdoc. I mean, that's the exception. That's not the rule. That's the exception. Like, I'm dissertating, she's doing a postdoc. Like, yeah, that was the only one one of the very few in the bunch, and that was 15 years ago. I don't think things are any different 15 years later. So we need to really keep in mind that part of our job as advocates is also creating these communities of support and bringing the family, especially, again, when you're thinking about that in some parts of the world, doctoral students are not single and living la vida loca. They're already, like, I mean, when you're in grad school in the States and you're in your late 20, your early 20 to 30, you're living la vida loca. It's Arrested Development. I know, I was there. 8 years of Arrested Development, and I loved every single day. And then the last year, I had to get my act together because I'm going to graduate. So it's like Bambi at the end of the movie. Everybody settled down because the movie's wrapping up.
Right.
But now we have in other places grad students, I'm thinking for our students in this case, who are my age. And they're dealing with stuff of people who are 50, 51, 55. I mean, I've been having to recalibrate my advising as I realize my students are, I have students who are 50 going through the body changes that people have at the age of 50. I mean, how am I going to advise them now? Because I cannot advise them the same way I would advise a 25-year-old who has all the stamina and the time in the world. But it's creating those communities, creating those spaces where as our students, as our people migrate, their families and the people they leave at home don't really feel left behind, but that we, within these spaces, we can invite them to the table. We can invite them to the cookout, so to speak. Let's not leave the families out of the cookout. Let's bring them in. There is enough room for everybody. There are empty chairs. I just noticed.
If I may, I think this invitation to being helpful is important. Connected to something you said, Raúl, as well, about the idea of how the socio-political environments of our times impact the experiences of international students and scholars, right? And right now, if we think of the world that we're in and the multiple kind of fires, right? The multiple ways in which politics and policies, right? And laws, right? And leadership, right? How all of those things are really impacting the world writ large. It's an invitation for us as international students and scholars as well to consider how do we care with and for each other in this moment, right? There are several things, I think Ming talked about this earlier as well, several things in terms of policies, right? We're talking about H-1B, right? We're talking about the Muslim ban. We're talking about the different ways in which additional systems and structures, right, impose upon international students trauma, right? Violence. And so I invite us to consider in this moment, in this kind of sociocultural context, how might we ensure that we're providing care to each other and to ourselves as all of these fires are kind of building up across the world?
Thank you. We have time for just one more quick question from Kim, who has her hand raised.
Oh, thanks again. Great conversation, everyone. I just wanted, it was something that Dr. Raúl just said that kind of triggered that thought, but just coming off of what everyone has said before, in whatever way that we can, I would also encourage us to preserve some of our cultural identities. And here's the thing. A lot of us seek that community when we're outside of our families and or natural homes, or, you know, we're looking for community. And it is important for us, if we're trying to have our students and faculty to find that community, that we don't muddy our identity in the way that it becomes hidden. And I'm trying to be very specific, because here's the thing. A lot of the times I am a Black woman, I am a Black facing woman, but I am a Caribbean woman. And I'm very intentional about saying that I am a Caribbean woman. That influences a lot of the ways I think, I behave, and things like that. And so by being intentional, by saying I'm not only a Black woman, I am a Caribbean woman, I have created a space where other Caribbean students who are very tiny on our campus, but still there, can at least find community with me. And so that's one of the things I wanted to point out, that it is very important for us to not get lost in just, oh, we're all people of color, we're all, whatever the terminology might be, but really, really stand on, I am Ethiopian American, I am Venezuelan, I am, whatever it is that would allow someone else to find community with you. Because I'm not going to walk up to someone and say, and just assume just by looking at them that they are my community. And sometimes it's very important for us to really, as much as possible, to really just, stand in that identity where we can encourage others to find community with us. That's all I wanted to say.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. So as a reminder, this is a series that will be going on throughout the academic year here at Penn State Abington. We are going to have a follow-up in collaboration with our global programs unit that's specifically going to be looking forward, maybe a bit of reflexivity. So many times we think about the next semester as that semester is upon us as faculty, but we'll be looking next month to be thinking about where we're at in our teaching practices and policies, and then where we want to be for next semester. So a little bit of planning ahead. And so folks will be invited in to think with our faculty and staff who are teaching on campus about what it might mean to have stronger practices and policies when it comes to international students. And then, of course, our meeting coming up, I believe, in November or December, November, I believe, without having it right in front of me. That is actually going to be a panel of our international students, and then more events to come. As you might know, the Office of Inclusive Excellence, we try and keep a fairly robust schedule of professional development things. So there's always more. If you have questions or want to be a part of these kinds of sessions, please check out our webpage for dates and things like that. I try and post on LinkedIn when I have things that are open to the general public as well. So follow us. I can't say that with the fidelity that the young people say, like, follow me on. I can't do that. But what I can say is that I do try and make sure things are posted and available to folks as often as possible. So thank you so much for your support today. If you have any questions, comments, etc., please feel free to find me. As always, supporting DEIB is something that's a community effort. I deeply, deeply appreciate sitting with you all in community today for that effort. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you for
Sure.
great
Big
space.
thanks to you, Bonnie. See you.